learn from 1:1. Fifth, unlike pre-Bible creation stories, there is complete silence regarding a birth of a deity. The God of Genesis 1:1, the God of the Bible, is not born. And again, this is something you go, yeah. But again, we're back in 13th century BC. I just told you Zeus was born from his father Kronos. And that's part of the Greek mythology. Okay? All of the gods, in Egyptian mythology, for example, the four major deities are all birthed from Atun, who is the primeval god of creation. And out of them are born Geb, Isis, Osiris, and Nut. Geb is the god of the earth, Nut is the god of the universe, and Isis and Osiris are twins, and they start producing all of the pantheons of gods. Set is Osiris's brother. Horus is the child of Osiris and Isis. He is the sun god. Thoth just appears. He's the god of wisdom. He battles with the moon to give us 5 extra days. And so forth. But all the gods are born from these unions. In Greek mythology, you have the primeval chaos, and then you have Uranos, which is the god of the universe, and Gaia, which is the goddess of the earth. And their union produces Kronos and Rhea, who is the primeval god and goddess who births the 12 pantheons, the Olympian pantheon. She has 12 kids, okay? And it is foretold that one of these children would kill Kronos, so he forbids Rhea from giving birth to the gods as a means of preventing his own destruction. But Zeus manages to get out, fights Kronos, kills him, and releases all of the other gods from Rhea. And thus we have the pantheon. So in these just two different cultures, we have this same idea that the gods are born from primeval gods and goddesses that are older than they are. Okay? In Hindu tradition, if I'm not mistaken, you have Vishnu, who is the god at the edge of the great river. And his consort is Lakshmi, who rubs his feet while he's sleeping. And while he sleeps, out of his navel comes forth the lotus. And on the lotus is Brahma. And Brahma is the creator god. He opens his eye and a world comes into existence. And he closes his eye and the world goes out of existence. He opens his eye, the world. And he does this every 485,000 years. So our current existence is the dream of the god at the edge of the universe who is having his feet massaged by his consort, Lakshmi. You know, gods begetting gods begetting gods. It's the same idea, yes.
So what do you say to secular people who argue that all these stories of all these ancient gods just was a bunch of stories that helped create the story of our God? Because that's a question that secular people will argue with you about a lot. I'm just wondering, how do you answer that?
Good question. How do you argue secular authorities who say, well, all of this, the God of the Bible is more or less no different than the other gods and goddesses of ancient times? How do you compare them? Aren't they all just made up? Isn't just one story more made up than the other? That's in essence what they're saying. And I would say it's a bit different for the reasons that are being presented here. The God of the Bible is completely different than the gods of India, of Sumer, of Greece, of Egypt, in that he is a lone God of creation. He is not born from other gods and other divinities. Okay? He is not related to the world. He creates the world. That's another big point. In fact, that's 6 and 7 in this. In fact, let me go into it. 6, for the first time in history, we are presented with a God who's completely separate from nature. All the other gods come from nature. Okay. And again, this goes back to the eternality of the world. The world exists forever. This was a seminal Greek thought, that the universe, that the world was eternal. Was eternal. Okay? It had no beginning. Okay? The gods came from the world, from the universe. There was a primeval chaos from which they sprang to bring order, but that was, again, an eternal state of matter that existed. Okay? What the Bible says is that, no, there was a beginning to creation, and God created creation. So he is separate from it. He's not birthed from it. Big difference. This is not the same type of story of Greece, Mesopotamia, India, Egypt, name your, they have a similar mythological beginning. Those you can compare. But the God of the Old Testament is completely different. It's a completely new idea. In fact, it baffles secular historians. It's like, where would you come up with this idea of monotheism? Freud tried to explain this in his book, Moses and Monotheism. He came up with a secular understanding as to where Moses may have come from. Very interesting idea. But again, it begs the question, where did it come from? Everyone else is fine with these multiple gods. Why are the Hebrews so insistent on their monotheism? They are just adamant about it all throughout history. I mean, they're just adamant about this monotheistic idea. Where are they getting this from? What motivated it? You know, we take this idea for granted. We just assume it. But in the 14th century BC, my God, they were all believing in these mythological tales of the gods being born from the earth and vengeful acts upon humans. That's why they sacrificed to them, to appease them, and so forth. I mean, the gods were not nice people. Even the Greek gods, they weren't nice. They played with humans like pawns on a chessboard. They would taunt humans. They would, I mean, they got their entertainment from playing with humans in history and stuff like this. You see what I'm saying? The gods weren't nice people, nor were they moral beings. The gods were petty, they were childish, they were stubborn, they were vain, they were obnoxious. These were some people that you wouldn't want to live with. Aphrodite is completely all into herself and her beauty. I wouldn't want to date her. I'm not a mirror. That's what I would say to her. It's like, honey, I'm not a mirror. You just go enjoy yourself. Because that's how she was. You realize that the Trojan War was begun because 3 goddesses couldn't get together? You know the start of the Trojan War, right? What caused the Trojan War?
Paris.
The judgment of Paris. The gods were having a party. And they invited all the gods and goddesses, even the minor ones, to the party, except for Eris. Who's Eris? Eris is the goddess of discord. If you're throwing a party, you don't want any discord in your party. So you don't invite her. Well, she gets a little ticked. I wasn't invited to this party. So she goes to Hephaestus. And she says, Hephaestus, make me a golden apple. And so he does. He says, put an inscription on it. Write on it, to the fairest. To the fairest. Like mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? So she goes to the party with the apple and she says, I know I'm not invited, but I brought a gift anyway. And she tosses it in the middle of the party. And the apple rolls, and it says, what is it? It's a golden apple. Ooh, look how beautiful. And it's to the fairest. Well, Aphrodite says, it's obviously for me. I mean, I'm the fairest, obviously. And Hera says, wait a minute, wench. I'm the queen of heaven here. You forget. I'm the fairest. And Athena says, you're both wrong, honey. I'm the fairest. The whole party breaks into a fight over this. And Zeus says, all right, enough of this bickering. We have to have a judgment here. Who gets the apple? And they say, well, none of the gods can figure this out. So they say, aha, because none of them can be fair. So they say, we'll let a mortal decide. And they say, what mortal? Paris will decide. So all three of the goddesses go down to Paris, and they said, who should the apple go to? Now, Hera says, if you choose me, of course, I will give you all the power in the world. You'll be the most powerful ruler in the world. Just say it. Just say it. And Athena says, well, you know, if you choose me, you'll be the wisest man in the world. Mm-hmm. And then Aphrodite says, well, you know, if you happen to choose me, I'll get you the most beautiful woman in the world. So Paris thought about this for a moment and says, Aphrodite's the fairest. So he gives her the apple. Well, of course Aphrodite is vindicated. I told you, hags, I was the most beautiful. Now, she keeps her word. She gets him the most beautiful woman in the world, who happens to be Helen of Troy. And Paris is Greek. So she absconds Helen and gives her to Paris. And so the Trojans say the Greeks have started this, and so now we have the Trojan War. See that? And all because of this party of the gods. See, they're petty, they're vain, they're selfish. These are not moral beings. None of the gods of antiquity were moral beings. You didn't look up to them because they were some paragons of virtue to follow and emulate. They were powerful people. That's why you feared them. You feared the gods. You tried to placate them. You tried to stay out of their way, and hopefully they'd stay out of your way. But they were not moral beings. This is another thing that, another element, probably a sixth element, that distinguishes the God of the Bible from the gods of ancient times. They were not moral beings. They were just very powerful beings. Their power determined who they were. Okay? So again, very unusual that this God of the Scriptures is a moral being that we would want to follow. Because the gods of antiquity were that way. So again, you have to look at this and you say, where did you come up with this? This is completely divergent from any of the cultures around you. God is not petty, he's not childish, he's not stubborn, he doesn't play with humanity like the gods of Greece and Egypt did. He is not to be placated in the same way. He is the one that calls out to his creation, Adam, where are you? Because he used to walk with him in the cool of the evening. You see that? Much different than any of her. So that's what I would go back and I would say, there is a superficial connection between the story of Epimetheus and Pandora with Adam and Eve, but it's a superficial one. Because when you get back to it, the gods are all involved. The gods are all petty. the God of the Bible isn't. He's not petty about this. He acts as a benevolent creator towards his creation. Much different than the gods of pagan times. Are you following me?
Yes.
And again, we take these ideas for granted. We just assume them. But this wasn't always so. He's separate from nature. God created nature, and therefore he's not a part of nature. So cutting down a tree doesn't hurt God. Killing an animal on the plains to eat does not hurt God. If I'm living in 13th century BC, I may believe that there's a spirit in this tree, or in this rock, or in this animal. And if I harm it, or if I don't placate it, then I might get some curse back upon me. You see what I'm saying? This was the superstition fear that ancient people had about certain places, certain animals, certain trees, certain rocks, certain plants. Okay? Because God is imbued in nature. The God of the Old Testament is separate from nature. You're not hurting God by, like I said, chopping down a tree, killing a lamb, whatever. Why? Because God's not in them. God's not in them. Okay? Again, major difference. You see, the reason why the gods of Egypt were both theriomorphic and anthropomorphic. Theriomorphic means in beast form. Anthropomorphic means in human form. So you had the goddess Isis, who looks like a human woman, but you also had the goddess Hathor, who's a cow. And she's a cow. A moo cow. I mean, horns and everything. That was Hathor. You had Sobek, the crocodile god of the Nile. You had